And the idea now is to look for a quick victory somewhere else away from France and Flanders. And Lloyd George thinks Palestine is where we can do it. We can knock the Ottomans out of the war, but also the Suez Canal will be safe from any threat.
The area Britain had set its sights on was a larger one than today's Israel-Palestine, made up of different regions east and west of the River Jordan. There were small Christian and Jewish populations, but the majority were Muslim Arabs. After centuries of Ottoman rule, many Arabs now wanted a nation of their own.
Nationalism is growing across the multinational empires of Europe during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and the Ottoman Empire is no stranger to this. The main reason for this is in 1908 there's a revolution within Turkey to try to strengthen and modernise the empire. It's called the Young Turk Revolution. And what happens is some very nationalistic Turks take over the government and are really into centralising and pushing the idea of Turkish identity. And this really starts to rile a lot of these Arab leaders. And this is where we start to get pan-Arab nationalism coming out and the idea of one independent land for all of those Arab peoples.
One of those leaders was Sharif Hussein of Mecca. In charge of the Islamic holy cities of Mecca and Medina, he was held in high regard by the local people. The British decided to use this to their advantage, promising him rulership over an independent Arab state if he rebelled against Ottoman rule. Sure enough, in 1916, the revolt began with Hussein's sons, Faisal and Abdullah, leading the fighting. As British and Commonwealth troops under General Allenby advanced through Palestine, Arab militia with help from T.E. Lawrence distracted the Ottomans.
This is a typical Arab headcloth, and it's accompanying a ghul, which is the headband that you keep the headcloth firmly on your head. And these were actually worn by an Arab who took part in that Arab revolt up through the Hijaz and into Palestine and Syria towards the end of the war. This comes from the regular forces of the Sharifian army. These men were former Ottoman soldiers, and they volunteered to fight for Arab independence. And they were particularly important because of their previous military training and skills with modern weapons such as artillery and machine guns. So these men are the Arab forces. They attack lines of communication, they blow up railways, they attack small garrisons, and that makes it very difficult for the Ottomans to move Emperor Selassie around. And finally, of course, on the 1st of October 1918, Faisal and the Arab army have the honour of taking the surrender of Damascus.
But while the battle for Palestine was still raging, the British were doing secret backroom deals elsewhere. Between November 1915 and January 1916, British and French diplomats Mark Sykes and Francois-Georges Picot carved up the Ottoman Empire into British and French spheres of influence. The borders were largely arbitrary, with little regard for ethnicity or religion of the local populations. France would receive modern-day Syria and Lebanon, as well as parts of Turkey and Iraq, while Britain claimed the rest of modern-day Iraq and southern and eastern Palestine. The remainder of the territory was to be under international control.
What the British were really looking for is an extra large buffer zone, again for the Suez Canal. It's all about the Suez Canal. The idea of making
this is in Africa
international area, it's really because the British don't want to give this to the French, but the French don't want the British to have it. So it's a compromise. And in fact, this whole agreement is a compromise. It's a wartime compromise between two countries that happen to be allies, but are both still big political and imperial rivals, and they will go back to being imperial rivals after the First World War.
Having already made commitments to Arab nationalists and the French government, in November 1970, the British made one more promise regarding the land in Palestine, this time to Zionists seeking to set up a national Jewish state. Zionism was a social movement that began in the 1800s. It was founded on the belief that Judaism was not only a religion, but a nationality.
You hear the lion?
Jewish people deserved a state like British or French people did.
Zionists.
Due to historical
Talking
and
about
religious
Jews.
ties to the region,
Zionists.
Palestine became the desired location for this future Jewish state.
So this armband, or brassard, was worn by a Palestinian Jewish volunteer with British forces serving in that area of the Middle East during 1918. Interestingly, there were 3 battalions of Jewish volunteers, 1 battalion of British one of Americans and one of Palestinian Jews. The British volunteers weren't really interested in Zionism at all. They were more interested in using that military service to the Crown, to assimilate into British society. It was really the American volunteers and the local Jewish volunteers from Palestine who were really fired up by Zionism and wanted to use this to defeat the Ottoman Empire and secure that Jewish homeland. So what this object shows us, and the story behind it, is that although Zionism was a popular movement, the majority of Jews were not Zionists and didn't want to move to Palestine.
Jewish immigration to Palestine had been slowly increasing throughout the 1900s, mainly fueled by brutal anti-Semitism and terrible pogroms in Russia. By 1914, the Jews in Palestine numbered around 60,000, or 8% of the population. But for the British, it was Zionists elsewhere that they were concerned with. In an effort to win the support of Jewish communities in both Allied countries like the United States and enemy countries like Austria-Hungary, the UK Foreign Secretary signed the Balfour Declaration, vowing to set up a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
So the Balfour Declaration is signed in late 1917, in fact just after Allenby's
Palestine
Battle of
is
Gaza.
in Egypt.
This map shows the situation just before that battle, and it shows the confidence that the British have that they are going to win the war in the Middle East. 'Cause let's face it, on this map, they haven't taken all of this territory yet, but they're already looking at the post-war settlement in this area.
You hear it?
There are people within the British cabinet, Prime Minister
This is
Lloyd
what
George
Biden
one
is
of them,
backing.
who thinks that having a Jewish homeland in Palestine is the right thing to do, but it's also politically expedient. The British and French war efforts by this time are pretty much under pressure. There's a manpower crisis, there's a crisis in raw materials. The Americans have joined the war in April 1917.
In Vietnam.
We really need the Americans to ramp up and get stuck into the war effort. So the idea is by supporting this Zionist idea,
the British
we will get
and
Jewish
United
financiers and industrialists in America on side, and they will put big pressure on the American government to keep them involved in the First World War and fight for the Allied cause. But this idea, this is an anti-Semitic idea, that the Jews control world finance and business across capitalist countries. And that idea takes hold and is one of the reasons we think they can put pressure on the American government.
The declaration was vague. It said that the homeland would be in Palestine, but didn't say where. It also vowed to protect civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities, but made no mention of their political rights. For the British, these conflicting promises were worth making to assure that they came out on top in the world's first total war. And they were effective. Britain and France were victorious over the Central Powers in 1918. But now that the war was at an end, the British would have to face the consequences. The choices they made would help to spark a century of conflict. Having captured Damascus in 1918, the British military left Faisal and his men in charge of a military occupation zone, an area that Faisal declared the Arab Kingdom of Syria. However, the French were not happy. Hoping to maintain their influence in the region, they expelled Faisal in a short war. It was a crushing blow to the pan-Arab cause. Instead, it was the victorious Allied powers who drew the new
Arabs are not from there.
A series of conflicts
That is not
from
their land,
1919
Egypt.
to 1923.
They are also
With the
invaders
formation
in the
of the
land.
League of Nations, Britain and France took control under a series of mandates. These were intended to prepare the local populations for independence. Initially, France was given the mandates for Syria and Lebanon, while Britain was given the mandates for Mesopotamia and Palestine.
Egypt.
But after Faisal's defeat, the British decided to split Palestine in two. Faisal was given the crown of Mesopotamia, and his brother Abdullah was given the crown of the newly created Transjordan. The remainder of Palestine would be strictly British.
So this 1924 map shows the Palestine that came into being after the First World War. It is not part of a pan-Arab state. In fact, there is no pan-Arab state in this region.
Because
also,
it's Egypt.
It is not an internationally controlled area.
It's an
or
invaded
area in which the French have any control at all. It is a British-administered League of Nations mandate. What this mandate of Palestine does have, however, written into its statute, is the Balfour Declaration of a home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
So you know,
Jewish
They are
immigration to
not from
mandatory
there.
Palestine continued to grow.
You see?
By 1931, there were
Why would you choose
176,000
a
Jewish
home?
people living there, making up 17% of the population.
see,
This
invading,
led to increased
invading,
tensions, riots, and violence between the new arrivals and local Arabs.
they're
who,
not from
along
there.
with existing Christian populations, were starting to see themselves not only as Arabs, but as distinctly Palestinian people.
you see?
What these new Jewish settlers bring in is lots of financial backing, and they start to buy up more and more land. So it's more the fertile agricultural land of Palestine, which actually makes the Jewish population increasingly economically dominant in the area.
You see?
The British government gets very, very worried about this. In 1930, the Colonial Secretary puts forward a white paper to drastically limit Jewish immigration into the Palestine Mandate. The following year, 1931, pressure from Zionists within the British government and also world Zionist leaders talks Ramsay MacDonald into dropping the white paper.
You see?
At that moment, there is no limit on Jewish immigration into Palestine.
You see? Invaders.
This
They're not
reversal
from there.
coincided with
Why would they have to
elsewhere
go there and
that would
say they're
supercharge
creating a
the
land,
conflict.
a homeland?
In 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany
Right.
and began
All right.
instituting a wave of anti-Semitic policies.
Listen,
This
listen,
sent shockwaves through the Jewish communities of Europe.
listen.
However, for those seeking to flee, options were few, with most governments maintaining strict limits on Jewish immigration.
You see?
For many Jews, Zionists or not, travelling to Palestine became the only option. By 1936, the Jewish contingent inside mandatory Palestine had doubled to 28% of
You
the
see?
population.
You see?
Now tensions began to escalate at an
See?
alarming rate.
They were not
What
from
began
there.
as a general strike among Palestinian Arabs in 1936
The Arabs were-
devolved
the
into
Palestinians are not
violent
from there.
attacks on Jewish settlements and British military
They all
installations.
invaded that
This
area.
event became known
That's the land
as
of
the Great
Egypt,
Revolt.
Africans.
From this point, really,
So you can imagine what
can
happened to the
see
Africans within
Palestinian
all this
Arab
British,
nationalism
Zionist,
as opposed to
French,
pan-Arab nationalism.
American,
They're
international
fighting
community
against an
invading
issue, that Jewish
area.
homeland and British control in the region, that no other mandate or any other has to fight against. And they want their own Palestinian state, an independent country, free from British control.
The British response was to crush the revolt as quickly as possible with
Kill the people.
overwhelming strength. They brought a surge of new troops, more men than were serving in India at the time, and declared martial law in 1937. Favouring tactics of collective punishment, they destroyed homes and burned villages to the ground. They used aerial bombing even on urban areas,
Same
and
thing they
arrested,
did to
killed,
Selassie.
or exiled Arab leaders, fracturing their movement.
In addition, the British use Jewish auxiliary units to fight the Arabs during the revolt. But this is a real turnaround from 1921, when they disband the Jewish Legion. Now, in 1936-37, the British are so overstretched that they really don't care. They just need boots on the ground to sort this situation out.
While
to
they
end
sit
this
up in the
revolt
castle
as
and the
quickly
palace,
as possible.
drinking
So by the
wine
end
and
of
laughing,
the Arab revolt, 17% of the Arab male
Killing and murdering
population
and
were
blood.
either killed,
Bloody
wounded,
murder.
imprisoned, or exiled. This
Bloody
really weakens
murder.
the Arab cause in Palestine, just
Even
at the
though-
moment when the Jewish population is getting more and more power.
You see? They're not from there. So when
Very
did
well.
it